Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Good morning if you're in a different time zone than me. I'm so glad and thank you so much for joining us today. We are really, truly thrilled to have you here for what we think is going to be a dynamic and insightful conversation. Today's topic for this webinar is unlocking workforce potential with inclusive and human-centered AI. And it's such a timely and important discussion. So we're going to dive into why AI is an important support for individuals without a four-year college degree who are skilled through alternative routes, also known as STARS. And together, we're going to explore how inclusive AI tools can unlock pathways to economic mobility. Over the next 45 minutes, you're going to hear from an incredible lineup of folks with their unique perspectives and deep expertise on this topic. So, introducing our panelists today, I'm very excited to have Tiffany Shea, who is the Director of Innovation Programs at JFF's Center for AI and the Future of Work. Tiffany is going to share her insights on AI literacy and the importance of equitable AI adoption across workforce organizations. We have Rick Hendra joining us, who is the director of the Data Science Center at MDRC. Rick is an expert in applying rigorous evaluation methods to the workforce innovations, and I know that he is going to have a lot to share about measuring the impact of AI tools. Araz Jizan is Senior Program Officer at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Araz is going to help us understand how funders think through scalability and sustainability for AI tools that make a real difference for underserved people. And last but certainly not least, we have Steve Lee, the CEO of SkillUp Coalition, who is going to guide us through today's discussion. Steve is such a thoughtful leader in this space. He brings a wealth of insight into how AI has the potential to reshape career navigation for STARS, and I am really excited to get this started. So with that, Steve and panelists, welcome to the stage. Happy to have you all here. Steve, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thanks, Ray. As my dad would say, last but least. So anyway, so I am stoked for this conversation. Like I am really, really stoked because we have such an amazing panel of folks who bring diverse perspectives in the field from philanthropy to evaluation to solutions, et cetera. And I just want to say, first and foremost, thank you to the panel for the privilege of your time. And also for the participants who have joined, thank you all for the privilege of your time. You could be doing a gazillion other things. So just thank you for your time. So let's get to starting things started. Tiffany, I want to start with you, Tiffany, if I may. There's been, as you know, a lot of talk around AI and literacy, all right? But I think given your unique perspective around having worked with the Center for AI at JFF and your recent release to AI Ready Workforce Framework, I think you bring a unique perspective to what this means. So share with the audience, if you will, why is AI literacy so critical to equitable opportunities for STARS, Tiffany?
Absolutely. Thanks, Steve, and thanks so much for having me. I am really excited for the conversation as well. And AI literacy is so important, right? So first off, what do we mean when we talk about AI literacy? We really mean how do we understand what AI is, how it works, what its limitations are, but also some of the competency and fluency around using AI in practice and recognizing its use. And I think there's really two key reasons we find AI literacy is so important. So one is the labor market is simply going to demand it. And secondly, there's an equity imperative around it, right? So, we at the Center for AI have been doing some research around what is the impact of AI on jobs and skills. And we're really, seeing that AI skills are eventually going to become table stakes. And we see that bear out in some of the data around job postings and job postings that include AI or artificial intelligence keywords. And we see across the board, regardless of what levels of education are demanded by a job, that there are significant increases in the demand for those skills. So for jobs requiring high school degrees, for example, we saw an increase of 82% from pre and post ChatGPT, and an increase in 25% of job postings for jobs that require associate's degrees. So again, the labor market is going to demand it, and it's going to become a ubiquitous skill. Secondly, there's this equity imperative around AI literacy. So we're already seeing that there are some trends that are echoing some of the digital divide trends that we've seen in the past around use of AI for those with bachelor's versus those without. For example, one study found that bachelor's degrees holders were using AI at a 40% rate versus only 20% for those without. And so we're really running into a place where on the one hand, we have labor market demanding AI skills, but individuals without bachelor degrees kind of lagging in the opportunities to build fluency and literacy around AI. And then that just makes us run into a world in which we risk stars being left behind.
Yeah, I think that's such useful insight, Tiffany. I think, given both the demand of this, right, but also the gaps that I think exist in the marketplace around equity, give us some thoughts around what you think that we could do to close this literacy gap, Tiffany.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we have a lot of those tools already, right? I think that there's a lot of content, for example, that exists around AI literacy, but we need to touch that down with the populations that are hardest to reach. And in the same way that we've been able to partner with community-based organizations that have real relationships with these individuals, that's definitely step one. And I would say not only should we focus on those organizations to help reach the individuals' stars, but we need to focus on the organizations themselves, right? They themselves need AI literacy. They themselves need the training then to be able to scale that to all of the folks that they serve. And then I would add on top of that also funding, right? Funding for digital access, funding for AI tools. I think those in tandem are really going to help us bridge that gap.
That's great, Tiffany. I'm reminded of some recent research that suggested that stars, right, when it comes to AI, might benefit most from the use of AI as opposed to, let's say, college degree holders, but only if they have the proclivity to do so, right? And so I think this idea of literacy and so actually I think is so important. I'm also reminded, I live in New York City, so I'm reminded maybe 15 years ago, the city implemented something called CS for All, computer science for all, right, within the high school system in New York City. And I'm always thinking about this as like AI for all, because I feel like if we don't have it for all, then folks are going to drop out. Tiffany, thank you, and thank you for your insights on this. It's really, really, really important stuff. So, if I may switch a little bit to Rick. Rick, you and I have known each other forever, and I think I've been very honest with you when I say for SkillUp as we develop our AI tool, it ain't worth anything much unless it shows positive impact, right? Again, if it doesn't show positive, like what the hell are we doing, right? So I'd love to get your thoughts, Rick, right, on just what evaluation is, right, so generally, and then share with the audience why you think evaluation is so important, right, in the AI space.
Yeah, well, thanks, Stephen. It's great to see you again. Thanks for having me. So evaluation in general is just about figuring out what works. It's about impact, figuring out the difference an innovation makes in real people's lives. And I would say evaluation is especially important with generative AI. So as Tiffany highlighted, there's so much excitement right now about generative AI, and we think it's very promising, especially for stars. So I agree that this is an absolutely important use case to study. One of the most exciting possibilities that we see for generative AI is the ability to personalize services at scale. So the idea of tailoring job leads and training recommendations based on the unique interests, talents, and backgrounds of individuals. To do that person by person is very expensive. So generative AI gives us that ability to do that at scale. But with promise also comes peril. So generative AI can hallucinate. There could be privacy concerns, biases in algorithms. There is the potential for unintended harm, which is just another reason why evaluation is so important. What we're doing here is basically pressure testing the AI hype cycle. We do see a lot of promise here, but let's see what it produces. So I think with SkillUp and the Gates Foundation's leadership, we want to rigorously examine whether these tools can actually deliver on these promises. So evaluation is how we separate meaningful innovation from hype. This is actually our first evaluation of generative AI. So it's not just about trying things out. Right from the beginning, SkillUp and the Gates Foundation wanted to understand what the effect is. So what we want to do here is test, iterate, and if needed, fail fast. We don't know if it's going to be effective or not. We think there's a lot of plausibility that it's going to be very effective, but let's learn together We're starting with a phased approach. The phase we're in right now in the evaluation is just basically making sure this is safe and effective and promising, putting really strong guardrails around it. Starting in winter, once we're comfortable with that, we'll start comparing AI-powered SkillUp to SkillUp Classic to see, is it moving the needle? And moving the needle in terms of things like making recommendations for jobs and training that are better, getting people into training opportunities and jobs, having a better and more efficient user experience. These are the kinds of things that we'd expect AI to help. So the AI, the evaluation is really path-breaking. We get a lot of attention for this evaluation from federal partners. I think the whole workforce field is looking, trying to figure out how much is this hype, how much is it going to add value, especially for populations like STARS. And we're not doing this just because it's new or exciting, but because we truly want to make a difference through this technology. And it's really through these rigorous methods like experiment that we're doing that we're going to see beyond a reasonable doubt, is it adding value in terms of better jobs and better training opportunities.
Rick, I think this is fantastic. And, to some degree, we expose ourselves to some risk, right? Because it could wind up that SkillUp AI isn't any better, perhaps, right? And I think that's actually useful learning, right, for the field, even if it doesn't work out. I think we're willing to take that risk. Let me ask you a follow-up question, Rick, which is, there are probably folks on this call who work for organizations who may not have the ability, perhaps, or the resources, right, to be able to do some version of a control trial. What recommendation would you have for these organizations to do some version of an evaluation of their AI tools?
Yeah, I think ultimately you want to get to a place of embedding evaluation to regular business practice, but you have to start somewhere. So I would say start small. Start with the data that are immediately accessible, like, for example, the data about your program services, and just make simple comparisons between people who got a service and those who didn't. Over time, you can get more rigorous with the methods that you use, but starting small is really important. We found that evaluations or organizations that start too big often have one evaluation and that's it. So start small, iterate often. Leadership commitment is key. This is about learning. This is not necessarily just about accountability and monitoring. This is about being a learning organization where we have a shared responsibility, a culture where we're willing to fail fast. We're willing to try things. We're going to take some risks, but we're going to learn through evaluation what works, what doesn't, and how we can build on that. So not being afraid to take those risks like SkillUp is right now. Looking at it as learning with a growth mindset is really key. I think that sort of culture is maybe the most important piece. And the second thing I would, again, focus on is just start small. Start somewhere with data that you have immediately accessible, and don't start with that moonshot project. And evaluate as you build. The evaluation was built into SkillUp AI from day one because we want to learn as quickly as possible. We know that early iterations of AI might not be perfect. We want to iterate, evolve it, get it stronger and stronger over time.
Great. I want to do the moonshot, Rick, right? I think people look. So this is why I want to have a Ross. So Ross, first of all, thank you for joining. I think Gates obviously has a unique perspective, right? Looks like from the fundraising space. Just curious, Ross. So the first question is, why is Gates funding development of scalable, inclusive AI? Like, well, why is it so important for the foundation?
Yeah, it's a great question, and thanks for the opportunity to be part of this discussion. So I think taking a big step back, we're focused on 93 million people who live in households that are at or below twice the federal poverty limit in America today. The problem is really big. And if the status quo were working, then maybe we'd say, well, I don't know that we need to lean into emerging technology because actually we've got it figured out. But I think the reality is we all know that business as usual isn't working. Folks are getting left behind. Lots of those households don't see an opportunity to leverage the workforce system and training to find greater economic mobility for themselves and their dependents. And so because of that, I think there's an imperative to try new things. And the foundation is excited to be able to try and support organizations like SkillUp to take an emerging technology like AI, where, Steve, I appreciate you saying, we don't actually know yet where this is going to be a useful value additive tool in the work that you're already doing. And so rather than trying to find organizations that are new to the space, I actually think our strategy so far has been to look at partners who have credibility, a trusted relationship with members of that focused population who have an existing model where they're able to measure the efficacy of these type of solutions, but who also see opportunity, right? And so I know we've been in conversation about, hey, for the sort of classic version of SkillUp's product, but for any organization, where are the places where you wish that something was working differently, right? So maybe you have a lot of people who come to your website and then lots of people don't end up registering. Or maybe they register and they browse, but they look at some great training programs or job opportunities and they don't end up actually taking the next action step. Or maybe they even apply for something and then they don't enroll. Or maybe they enroll and then they drop out or they don't stay retained in that program. Each of those individual opportunities or sort of places where we wish things were going a little bit differently represent an opportunity to try new things. And I think our working hypothesis is that AI can be one tool in the toolkit for folks to be able to try and deliver more support to folks in these kind of contexts. Maybe the last thing I'll say here is I've become pretty convinced that a really powerful tool in service of economic mobility is something that we're calling navigation. So I think we all experience this in our daily lives. You get a bill from a healthcare provider and you think something's not quite right. Well, first I need to look and figure out what to do about that. I need to access some information. Then I need to make a decision. Then I need to follow through on that decision. And following through, unfortunately, particularly when we're talking about folks who are low income, often involves a lot of paperwork, bureaucracy, and headache and logistical pain in the butt. Those all to me represent opportunities where technology can help try and provide some better support. And we know that these type of navigation supports, when delivered thoughtfully in a responsible and personalized way, can really move the needle for people. And we know that there's a bottleneck, right? Because if you've ever tried to, get access to some kind of advice, coaching, counseling, mentorship, support, these are constrained supplies of navigation support. And so anything we can do to broaden access to those type of supports, I think, could be a really positive step in the right direction if it's actually done in a responsible and effective way. And I think that's the real big asterisk here is I don't think we yet have a clear definition or playbook for how organizations can leverage AI in that way. And so that's some of the work that we all have to do together as a field is to develop more of the playbook or approach or evidence base around what works. And here works is not just about efficacy, but it's also about ethics.
100%. And really thank you for that insightful comments. Like, yeah, we talked yesterday about like for any organization, like these small wins, right? And how do you define small wins to put into playbook? I think that's something we're all gonna have to wrestle with, including SkillUp. We have to wrestle with what's a win, how you define a win, how do you put it in playbook? But I think it's the exact right strategy. I think another thing that sort of the audience might be interested in is obviously there are a bunch of funders who are funding AI. So I'm curious whether you've come across any differences of opinion, right, between Gates and others and how you all think about ethical AI.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there are a few camps here that are maybe a little bit of a caricature, but I'm going to sketch out because I think it's direction. So I think there's a set of folks who are utopian thinkers. And I think that's valuable, but particularly I live in California. I think there are a set of folks on the West Coast who have a mindset that says this technology is going to radically transform the world. And in fact, it'll be the answer to all our problems. I think there's a second group of folks who maybe have the exact opposite point of view, where they are really focused on the risk and harms that this technology might create, particularly for vulnerable populations. And then I think my hope is that we can together build a third group who are cautiously optimistic, maybe. And what I mean by that is we're cognizant of the fact that there is a legacy of technology exacerbating bias and sometimes creating harm. I think the flip side is that we are also really conscious of the status quo not working, right? And so in between those two things, we're going to try and find a middle path that says we're going to lead with some amount of cautious optimism that these tools can be useful, but we're going to be pretty clear-eyed and rigorous about where they're actually adding value. And maybe most importantly, we're going to make sure that we have a really clear point of view on how we're going to try and ensure that they're not exacerbating or creating new bias, and that we have a clear framework about ethics and where and when these tools can be responsibly developed, tested, and deployed. And so my hope is that Philanthropy can play a role in that. Obviously, organizations in the field and our beneficiaries can play a role in that. But that we can find this middle path, right, and not fall into this kind of binary light switch on, light switch off thinking, which I think is not very productive.
I love that framing around middle ground. I remember last week, Webster's Dictionary, the word of the year in 24 was polarization. That was the word of the year, right? This is not that, at least we hope. And so I really, really appreciate this notion of sort of cautiously optimistic. All right, let me flip the gears a little bit, if I may, and hand it back to Tiffany for a sec. Tiffany, I know you do a lot of work with folks in the field. So just curious, what are you seeing broadly in the field around AI adoption within particularly workforce organizations?
Yeah, absolutely. We've been really lucky that we've been able to talk to so many people kind of across the ecosystem, from workforce development boards to training providers, higher education institutions, you name it. And I think it kind of echoes what we see in the broader field, which is that we're still in the early stages of adoption. So some folks are further along in this journey, some folks are a little bit still figuring out their first steps. I think we hear a lot that some are playing around with AI, in direct service context in particular. We hear a lot about, building resumes and cover letters for folks, researching kind of like high demand careers. And then there are some like really forward thinking and innovative workforce organizations. I would say SkillUp probably falls in this category as well, who are really charting a path on their journeys, from providing their staff with AI training to even building their own tools and deploying AI in really strategic ways. But I think generally what we hear is that folks agree that AI is here, that AI is necessary, and they need to figure out the ways in which they can incorporate it. But I think we see a few kind of trends and themes around what are the blockers and challenges with that. And I think one is there's still a lot of fear around the narratives around AI. I think that's definitely what we see. And I think it's paired with what we talked about earlier with AI literacy, right? Really understanding what the technology can do, having the opportunities to learn and build the fluency, I think will really address that. Secondly, I think we hear a lot around costs, right? There are a lot of free tools out there, but there's still the cost of deploying AI as well. And then the cost of the tools that are more advanced are often out of reach for a lot of the workforce organizations that exist. And then just, from the deployment perspective, finding the actual use cases that are strategic and right for them, sifting through the noise of all the tools that kind of exist out there currently. Like those are all skills and part of the change management of an organization that a resource constrained organization may not have the time to do. And then I'll just say one last thing, which is that we did a review of use cases for generative AI in workforce development and did a scan of some of the tools that exist. And I will say that there's a lot of individual facing tools, but not so many that are really geared towards organizations and really augmenting their ability to support job seekers. So I think I'm really excited to see more movement and work in that area as well to really support those organizations.
I think that leads me to a follow-up question is that, sometimes technology leaves people behind or leaves organizations behind. You got some winners, you got some losers. I think that's been borne true in the past, 40 years or so. So tell me how you think about that. How do you think about folks left behind or organizations left behind? What can we do to try to address that?
Yeah, I think very similarly to what we've talked about before, I think we're at an inflection point. And I think if I were to say anything to this group, is that we have agency at this moment in time too. And right, we're not letting AI happen to us. We can make the choices that we need to not leave people behind, right? So whether that's, strategically partnering with community-based organizations to really roll out AI in a thoughtful manner, making sure that we have more foundational, universal AI literacy, and then just, making sure that we're connecting across systems and across stakeholders to really share what we're learning. I love what you're doing, Steve, and I love the vulnerability of saying maybe this isn't going to work, because I think that's valuable in and of itself, and bringing folks together around that is really going to help move us forward.
It's possible it doesn't work. We'll see. Let me, if I may, just go back to Roth for a second, maybe be a little more tactical, right? Around some of the Gates stuff. Gates has been funding AI for at least a year or so. Just curious for the audience, any early learnings that you guys have seen from some of the investments that you guys have made?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll share 4 early learnings, and would love to, Steve, dig into any of them. So the first, I think, and we've talked a lot about this, is the importance of defining a clear use case or a discrete problem to be solved, right? And Rick mentioned measurement and thinking about effectiveness, but effectiveness is downstream from being clear on what it is that you're trying to do. So is it that as the world exists today, there's like a very specific place where something about SkillUp's offering is not working, right? And I think like the more precise and well-defined the problem to be solved is, the easier the measurement and evaluation gets. And I think even thinking about a big, ambitious moonshot, the work, I think, is turning that into a set of really discrete, concrete steps along the way that give you the opportunity to do. Rick, I love that you said, sort of that learning organization mindset of testing and learning. I mean, that's the second thing I'll say. I think we need faster feedback loops here. I don't think that it's going to work for us to say, our goal is to have an AI coaching advisor, and we'll spend 6 months building before we get it in front of a user. I think this has always been true for software development specifically, but I think even more so right now, when the capabilities of what these large language models can and can't do are so poorly defined, particularly for our context. I'll say here that I think what I'm excited about in this partnership is that when I look around at the field of AI, and you guys probably have seen this too, there are all these exciting stories coming out in the healthcare space and in the education space. And I feel like we are at risk of falling a little bit behind in the economic mobility and workforce space. And so I think we have to lean in. I mean, Tiffany said this. I think like this AI transformation wave, it may be a hype cycle, but the technology is gonna evolve with or without our involvement. And so if we want to bend it in the direction of the use cases that we care about and the people that we care about, we have to be involved. Okay, so the third thing I'll say here, and I alluded to this, is that you mentioned AI investments specifically here. Maybe I'll just sharpen a little bit and say generative AI investments are a thing that is relatively new. We've been investing in sort of what I'll call traditional AI or machine learning for a long time, and I think a robust field in that space. And so the reason I mentioned that is that one thing that we're learning from partners is that when solutions are effective, they are often braiding together those two versions of AI. So sometimes they're leveraging these large language models similar to what we all experience with ChatGPT or Perplexity or any of these tools. And sometimes what they're doing is actually pointing something at a much more traditional deterministic AI model. And without getting too wonky or technical, what I'll say here is we just need to get clearer about where each of these versions of AI or these models shine and where we actually care a lot about being more prescriptive, right? So if I'm giving somebody a recommendation about a training program, I probably don't want ChatGPT to use the training data of the entire internet, including a bunch of Reddit and Wikipedia pages, to make that informed decision. Actually, SkillUp probably has data that is a much better source of truth. I know that you do, about what the right training program, high quality, vetted, good fit might be. So let's not ask ChatGPT to answer that question. Let's actually point to that other more traditional deterministic model. And the devil is very much in the details here in terms of how you set up the solution architecture and the technical side of things. But I think that's a big learning, and there's a ton of experimentation and trial and error required to get that right. And the last thing I'll say here is, I think often folks are thinking of ethics or responsible AI development as a discrete thing, like a thing that happens. I like that, Rick, you said, we need to make sure that measurement and learning and evaluation is embedded as a practice throughout the whole work. I think we have to think about ethics and responsible AI in the same way. So I mentioned use cases, pause. How are we thinking about ethics and responsible AI development in the context of what problem we're trying to solve and who we're trying to solve it for? Then when we talk about testing and learning, how are we making sure that we're thinking about different sub-constituencies or subpopulations within our user group? Some of the emerging data already points to disparities in gender and age around who actually uses these AI tools or how they perform, right? So those are the kind of things that you'd want to see people think about all along the journey, rather than, hey, actually, I built something, I did a bunch of piloting and testing, now let me pause and do an ethics review. Nope, you've missed the point. So those are the two things, I think, both on the measurement and evaluation side of things, and also on the ethics and responsible design, that as a funder, but also just as a person who wants good work to happen in the world, like I'm really keen to see how people are thinking about that as a lane that runs all the way through a project or a solution development cycle.
I love that, Ross. Thank you for those really important insights. I'm struck on this. I think it was your third bullet point, Ross, around this idea of prescriptiveness versus creativity, right? And so one of the things that we've learned, right, is that ChatGPT, they want to be creative, right? But we may want to be prescriptive, and balancing that prescriptiveness versus is actually a real challenge, right? And we've experienced that challenge, and hopefully we can come to some middle ground. I really thank you for. I think the audience is going to love those insights. Awesome. And by that would say to me, last but not least, but in this case for Rick, last but certainly not least, Rick, let me hand it back to you. As you look ahead, as you look forward, right, and so the world that this world is going around Gen AI, how do you think AI-powered tools can evolve, right, going forward to help boost long-term career outcomes for stars?
Yeah, well, I think the key word there is evolve, and just to double down on what Aras was saying about these like AI utopian people or AI pessimists, that's actually a real risk because they're probably both going to be wrong, as we said. And what's much more likely to happen is that it's going to take some iteration here, lots of iterations. Like the famous example is the light bulb. There were dozens and dozens of models or designs of the light bulb until the thing worked, right? So that's here you have a tool, generative AI, that actually is a trial by error tool. And it is, I think, very likely that some of the early solutions will not only not be better, they may be worse than the sort of status quo. But if we stop there because we're too pessimistic or because our expectations were too high, there's a real risk we're not going to break through that cycle and keep testing, because the learning curve upside potential, I think, is very good. We just have to work through that cycle. So I'll point to a couple of areas specific to workforce development. I mean, some of these have been mentioned already, but this idea of navigation and democratizing personalized guidance is a very big deal. There are substantial informational inequities in the labor market in terms of what data people have, what social networks they have access to. So the idea that AI could provide, after some iteration, after some testing, potentially high quality career guidance for people who don't have access to that is a very big deal. Also for people who are not so privileged to be surrounded by people who've achieved career success in certain fields. So I think it's just really going to be very valuable for stars in the populations that we're talking about today. The other thing I would note is that AI is obviously very convenient for multiple different sort of timeframes and cycles. It's available 24/7, right? So that's a big deal. The idea of having personalized support that's dynamically adapting to you based on your interests and needs and your circumstances is something that just has not really been available at scale in workforce development. We have tons of workforce data. We don't always use it well, in my opinion, in terms of defining really good articulated career pathways that make sense. AI can do that, again, with training, with high quality data. So we have a data problem to solve to really, get there on this, but the technology does have the promise to help job seekers or individuals who are employed find when is it time to make a transition, when is it time to make a skills upgrade. In workforce development, we have a problem currently where programs might last 6 to 9 months, if that, and then people move on. And it's just very difficult for providers. Like they have this ever-growing caseload of individuals to work with who've been through the program. And we know that careers are a sequence of many steps, many training opportunities, many job switches. So here's the possibility for a tool that could be available to help you optimize the timing of those job switches, of that additional training. So that's sort of like post-employment support is an area that I would really highlight. That's been an issue that's been hard to solve with sort of one-on-one personalized services. So there's just lots of potential. I mean, we haven't even talked about what you could do in terms of reaching different communities. I mean, AI, can put, in different languages. It could help with cultural competency. But all of that is net of what, Aras was saying about being very careful about potential biases. AI is trained on data. The data are often overrepresenting white voices, overrepresenting North American voices, overrepresenting certain professions. So we have to be very careful about bias, equitable access, and all the issues that we've discussed today. That's something that's not just like an afterthought, as was mentioned. That's something that we have to do from the beginning.
Awesome, as always, so thank you. One of the things I think that I'm hearing is the journey of a job seeker SAR can be very long and very arduous, right? As we all know, right? And for organizations, we have to play the long game to some degree. And yet we have to be willing to fail in very, very often cycles, right? But it's often hard to play the long game when you're constantly failing, right? So I think it's a challenge that we're all going to have to wrestle with. But I hear you on like this long game, because I think that's where the power, perhaps, right, if JJ and I can really come aboard. All right, we're almost at the end, right, for participants and for the panelists. I want to end for each of the three, if I might, just some parting comments, right, around anything that you all would like to share, right? It can be anything, right? We can talk about Richard's vest and tie as an example, right? I've known Rick for many years, and so I can make fun of it. It looks great. But maybe I'll hand it off to you, Tiffany. If you'd like to share anything with the audience, it can be anything around your AI. What would you like to share?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, great best, Rick, but I think just in terms of AI, I'm really excited for the future, right? I think we're in the stage where folks are really figuring it out and really applying those strategic use cases, or as you said, to a lot of kind of efficiency-based use cases, as we like to call them, right? We're trying to see what we can do with the resources that we have, be able to really augment, the career coaches, for example, that folks are employing, and really extend their ability to reach more folks. And that's great. And I want to hone in on the human-centered AI part of this too, right? Like, how are we making sure that we're leveraging AI in a way that is still keeping that human connection, and facilitating that kind of beyond just, freeing folks up to do more relationship building, right? Is there something around social capital development that we can facilitate through AI? Is there's something that we're helping more people connect with each other, and not necessarily, using AI as a silver bullet for everything. So I just want to leave the audience with that piece, and just making sure that we're still honing in on the human side of folks.
Human and not a silver bullet. Love it. Rick, let me go to you if I may. Anything you'd like to share as a parting comment to the audience?
Yeah, I think I'd like to build on what Tiffany was saying about the human element. And what I'd like to say there is that I think it's useful to think of AI in terms of workforce professionals. Think of this as a force multiplier or a people amplifier, not a replacement for staff. I think this is just a tool, a powerful tool that's going to make you more effective in the work you're doing. But we shouldn't think of this as a way of replacing that work. It cannot. There just needs to be a human in the loop. If anything, I think this is going to create additional need for that. So don't just think of this as like pure technology taking the place of workforce professionals. Thinking of it as helping workforce professionals reach an even larger group more effectively.
Great. You and Tiffany are very much aligned on this, so that's great. All right, Ross, I'm going to hand off to you last, sir.
Well, I definitely want to echo the point about just the role and way we think about AI. I had a partner recently say something that stuck with me, which is today there are lots of people whose time is spent on paperwork instead of social work. And I think across the board, when I look at organizations that I've been a part of or that I know of in the field, boy, do people spend a lot of time on things that could be described as automatable, boring stuff, right? Admin. And so I think getting clearer again on not to be a broken record, but what is the use case here? Like, what are we hoping to actually leverage AI for versus where do we think that actually the active ingredient in what works is empathetic human connection, right? In the education world, I think folks have done a lot of thinking about this. Like, actually, the goal is not to help people produce a better essay for the homework assignment. The whole learning exercise is about healthy, productive learning struggle and really trying to bend yourself. So a solution that just helps me write an essay, actually that misses the boat because the goal is not producing essays. The goal is helping me learn how to write. Right. Meaningfully with that. So what is the version of that for our space, right? I think that's a hard question. And I would push practitioners in the field, all of us, to have a point of view on what the answer that question is, because I think that's the biggest thing here. If we don't have a clear point of view on how this emerging technology should be put to work in service of what we care about, other people are going to use their point of view, and we're probably not going to like it. Right. And so I think that's part of why we all have to together, I think, lean in to this space, whether we're talking about community-based organizations or philanthropists or, anybody working in the workforce space. I think having a point of view on where you see or want to see AI actually go, I think is the first step to us, hopefully as a field, starting to try and put that into practice. I also wanted to briefly touch on, I know there's a question in the Q&A from Spencer about guides or resources for taking an iterative approach to testing AI solutions. And maybe I'll toss it to you, Rick, in a second, because you probably have a point of view on this too. But I just want to say, I think there are big gaps here in terms of existing public goods or resources or knowledge artifacts. It's something certainly at Gates we're thinking about trying to support organizations to build. I think there's also, part of this is the blueprint or the knowledge, and part of this is how hard is it to put that blueprint to work. And so there's, I think, also a question here about what are the trusted software solutions, middleware, partner organizations who can help organizations that might not have the in-house capacity to actually utilize some of these approaches and methods when it comes to AI. But Rick, I don't know if there's anything you'd add there, or Tiffany.
Yeah, I think there's a real need to get some resources out there. I would agree on sort of best practices for iterative testing. Definitely we have some internal resources that we use first of all to assess whether an AI solution even makes sense. Like we have like a readiness report we look at, like whether we should even evaluate something. And then this sort of like multi-phase process is really important. So I think looking at AI like a clinical trial, in a sense that you're dealing with something potentially dangerous, actually, right? So being really careful and then staged phase 0, phase 1, phase 2, first testing in a really small, very contained way. I would say not even including participants at first, probably just the engineers and other people, red shirt teams that work to make sure that the tools are not doing damage. And then when you get to the iterative phase, which I think is like phase 2 or 3, then what you want to do is test pieces of what you're trying to perform. So again, knowing what these use cases that you're trying to solve for is critical. Breaking that into pieces, so you test iteratively and sequentially. So you're not going to get that in one round of testing. That might require 5 rounds of testing, to be honest, to really get it to a steady state. And then you have the issue of how do I put those pieces together into a bundle that works. So there's certain research designs, and I don't want to go too technical on this, but there's tools out there like there's factorial designs and other ways that you could multi-arm bandits that people are using to try to figure out how to assemble the various active ingredients that Aras was talking about. And then after that, you can do a field test. So it's a very iterative process, but I agree that we need to get more information out there and better standards out there. And it needs to be quick. It can't be, these aren't going to be 5-year studies. The technology is moving in like 5 days, not 5 years. So.
And maybe Rick could ask that later. You might share some of those materials with the broader audience. All right, we have 1 minute left. So I want to end by saying this. I can't think of 3 better people that have a point of view on what the world should look like than 3 of you guys. So really, thank you, first and foremost. I've also been thinking about, believe it or not, improv. So about 10 years ago, I took some improv classes, and you guys all know, like, improv is like yes and, right? But I like to be yes but, right? The challenge, I think, for us and maybe the system is what follows the and, right? Because I think that's a real challenge for us as an ecosystem. But it has to be, I think, a yes and I think those are some of the learnings we've had. So for me, it's yes and to figure out what fills in these dots. This is also time for me to make a shameless plug, right, to the broader audience, if I may. So stay connected to SkillUp through joining our newsletter if you might. There's more coming on SkillUp come January. So I want to make that shameless plug. But since we're at the witching hour, thank you first and foremost, panelists, for what I thought was an amazing conversation insight. So just thank you. Thank you for the participants for the privilege of your time. And last night, Faye told me we'll make the recording available for folks and for folks who haven't seen it or God forbid want to see it a second time. And we'll end there. So thank you guys. It's been an honor and pleasure. And onward and upward, folks. Thanks, everyone. Happy holidays. Happy New Year, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Be well all.